Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me are former U.S. Army Cyber Command contractor Jacob Horne and cybersecurity veteran Chris Pierson to discuss how state-backed hackers are infiltrating IT supply chains, why traditional cyber defenses are failing, and the urgent steps businesses need to take to secure their digital ecosystems. Gentlemen, it's great to have the both of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. And Jacob, as the Chief Security Evangelist at Summit 7, give us some background in terms of your role and where Summit 7 sits within the cyber ecosystem.
Yeah, so we are the primary company inside the defense industrial base, working with defense contractors that handle regulated, sensitive DoD data. And so you can think of us as the outsourced IT and security department for the contractors that don't have those internal resources. As it turns out, most defense contractors don't have those internal resources. And so I'm the primary intermediary between the world of security, compliance, and the contractors.
It's a big intersection there, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Chris, tell us about the role of BlackCloak and where you sit within the cyberspace.
So we are digital executive protection. So BlackCloak protects board members, corporate executives, executive leadership teams, as well as those people that are key personnel, all different sectors. But we protect them and their families in their personal lives. So when you think about it, the number of controls that are there at the corporate landscape and with the corporate walls keep on rising each and every year. So cyber criminals and nation states are looking for other means by which they can get through. Some of that is through the supply chain, and other of that is through the personal lives, their personal email accounts, personal devices, their personal finances, and extortion and ransom, all in their personal life. And the same for their family members. So what BlackCloak does is we go ahead and protect them so that the attacks don't happen back into the company, so the attacks there don't permeate back there, and so you don't have other reputational and financial risks or IP risks.
So, Chris, looking at both of your notes, Jacob was included as well. Cyber campaigns by nation states are evolving rapidly. Tell us more about what they're doing and what is so challenging about us being able to counter those attacks.
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting is that once again, and I think from what Jacob is doing and what we're doing is we all acknowledge that the walls, the castle walls around many of these companies have gotten higher, gotten deeper, all the rest. And so the indirect attack is really where things are at. How can you go ahead and get in, not directly, but through a supplier, through a vendor, through software or hardware that the company has to use, through other third-party means, and through their personal accounts, personal devices. We've seen a lot in the news recently on the use of personal devices, personal phones, personal accounts to do government business. And once again, these indirect attacks where the defenses are a little bit lower, a little bit weaker, or sometimes non-existent, is a really smart thing for both nation states and cyber criminals.
Yeah, and Jacob, I would imagine because they are going through IT cloud infrastructure and they're going through suppliers and vendors and subcontractors where the enterprise itself doesn't necessarily have that bird's eye view of their cyber profiles, it makes it more challenging because they're not the ones at the control there, if you will. And I would imagine that it also allows them to attack multiple verticals, multiple enterprises at one time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as an intermediary, it makes perfect sense. Why would you bother to try to go through the front door of a multi-billion-dollar defense contractor with an army of cyber professionals when the data that you're after and the access that you're after is available a couple tiers down in the supply chain where they have no resources or visibility or any of the basics that would actually go pretty far counterintuitively.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was just about to say, I totally agree. It's when you can get that one-to-many attack, it's so much more appealing. We could just take the Move It breach in terms of attacking Move It, which is used by a lot of different law firms for secure file storage. Well, let's just say that these law firms, right, their intellectual property groups, patent attorneys, all the rest, they have 200 clients, 500 clients, 5,000 clients. If you can hit one different system, right? In this case, Move It is my example. You get one different system that all the major law firms use, and you get 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 clients in there, and all the patents, different applications they have, different intellectual property. It's wonderful, right? That one-to-many attack can net them many different sectors to go after, many clients to go after, all through just compromising indirectly one key tool.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Jacob, let's talk about an incident response plan. Let's look at it through that perspective there. Does it take longer to detect when they go through these types of methods versus going directly to the enterprise? And then, of course, you have to think about the trust and all the responses being in coordination with each other. I would think the response is just as challenging.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a lot of these situations, there's almost no response capability whatsoever because when these small suppliers don't have the capabilities in place to detect what's happening, even when the government might detect what's happening within these smaller critical companies, when they show up to do the investigation, there's no logging, there's no data, there's no information. And so, a lot of times we see the conversation in congressional hearings or at national policy level oriented around the need for incident reporting and information sharing, sharing threat intel information. And all that is great. That's absolutely the big goal. But if you don't have the precursors in place to leverage that information or to facilitate that information sharing cycle, then you're kind of left empty handed whenever an incident happens and you actually need to do incident response.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I don't know if it's fortuitous, but today, April 28th, with the, severe outages in Spain and Portugal, there was a lot of commentary out there. Of course, it hasn't been confirmed that perhaps it could have been cyber related. And of course, I'm not suggesting that that's what the case, but you can see, in real world cases, how these can have, massive impacts across critical infrastructure, if in fact that was the cause of it.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely. Yeah, we've seen this happen in multiple sectors. And every time, if anybody goes and reads some of the sector reports on their threat reporting and what they perceive as being the biggest risks in those threats, it's almost the same pattern every single time across every single sector, where once you get away from the big players and agriculture, energy, water, wastewater, defense, doesn't matter what the sector happens to be, you have the same problem where you've got a bunch of small suppliers that are under resourced and, of a set of authorities maybe where the government can come in and help them, but even then sometimes it's a little dicey about what the relationships are in those sectors.
Right. And of course, you have to start thinking about the whole privacy law issue
Exactly.
that comes into it as well. That if what happened in San Bernardino is a reflection of what I'm thinking. Chris, when you think about incident response plans going forward, how can you include supply chain scenarios, or what would your recommendation be?
Well, I mean, yeah, look, at the end of the day, companies need to understand who their third-party suppliers are and sometimes who their fourth-party suppliers are. We need to do so from just keeping the lights on and running good business. We need to do so from a risk posture, right, where you're actually looking at what is the inherent risk of doing nothing, trying to figure out what controls may or might be available, and then figuring out if it's that residual risk, one that the company, one that the board wants to go ahead and own. In this day and age, it's become a little bit hard to actually go much further than that. Like if we take a look back almost a year to the CrowdStrike outage, CrowdStrike most certainly best in class in terms of EDR, best in class in terms of operational expertise and excellence. And yet that attack, or not attack, but that flaw caused, a global outage of proportions that we'd never seen before. So sometimes with the largest of large companies, that can be a risk attack surface that actually, right, on the cyber side, or just in terms of operational issues, the same as, right, with smaller different vendors, smaller different companies that are also providing different sub-layer services. The fact of the matter is, what do you need to do? Number one, within a company, you need to ensure that you have governance around this. Where does this risk rely? Who does it report to? Is there a chief risk officer? Two, what is a formal program that is being implemented, being developed? And is it then agreed to by all the other business lines, right? This is about business, not just risk, but agreed to by all the different business lines that exist within the company. Three, is it modeled in a fashion that will actually bring the company's business forward? And four, do you have the right parties at the table to go ahead and analyze and assess that risk, put in some mitigating controls? And then five, review it on at least an annual basis, or one or two or every 3 years, depending on the risk level or support level of the company. But we all know that the inherent risk is increasing, that nation states and cybercriminals are taking advantage of this one-to-many through those indirect suppliers, and it's going to continue.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And Jacob, I think it's interesting because we cover cyber frequently on the show here. And a key theme is the evolving role of the CISO and getting that buy-in across all the verticals within the enterprise and removing those silos in order to get that bird's eye look and understand, where the risk layers exist. And I would say of all roles that have evolved, let's call it over the past 5 to 10 years with the move to cloud, then we had COVID, then, we have a hybrid work environment, a couple of elections in between, geopolitics are heating up. The role of the CISO and being able to communicate this and understanding who their audience is already get that buy-in, it's critical. It's not in my mind, a nice to have department of cybersecurity defense. I think it's absolutely necessary to the business model and for business continuity.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, to Chris's point, the trade-off between risk and cybersecurity here, conflicts with the risks that the business wants to take. And so, the CISO generally gets saddled with all these responsibilities. To your point, I mean, it's absolutely evolved like crazy over the years. The problem that they face is the problem that we face, broadly, that business is about taking risk, and the risk that the business is willing to take within the confines of their four walls is very different whenever you add it all up at the total collective risk when everyone decides to do that. So, Chris has awesome points for what everybody needs to do. Unfortunately, what we've seen specifically in the defense space is even when companies do have CISOs, they almost always want to take more risk and, agree that these are important things to do, but they rarely get implemented fully, except in maybe some of the largest organizations. And so we've got a real problem in the defense space, all the other critical infrastructure sectors, where business risk is incentivized. And sometimes the risk management around cybersecurity, despite how it's evolved, is not incentivized to the same degree. And so we've got a bigger and bigger gap that goes by every week, every month, every year. It gets more and more precarious.
And Jacob, from a regulatory perspective on a high level, has progress been made there to perhaps put some framework or guardrails on there or guidance for companies?
Kind of, sort of. It depends on the sector. So a good example is the water, wastewater sector. So before some recent regulatory changes, the EPA tried to get creative by interpreting their authorities and saying, well, we're responsible for conducting annual surveys for providing clean water. And cybersecurity is a critical part of keeping these systems operating and providing clean water. Therefore, we have the authority to conduct cybersecurity assessments. And they were immediately sued by various states' attorneys general. The whole thing was overturned. They got stopped in their tracks. Industry groups got together and lobbied for looser, more open-ended requirements. About a year went by, and then sure enough, the set of requirements that they came up with were identical to the set of requirements that the EPA wanted. So we just sort of are going around and around in circles. A better example would be the defense supply chain, where the DoD has suppliers that are actually on contract with the Department of Defense rather than just this sort of loose collection of authorities. And they're turning the screws pretty hard on their suppliers when those suppliers are handling their regulated data, where they actually want proof from third parties that the requirements in the contracts have been implemented, because the department and national security and the taxpayer have absolutely experienced real harms over the years from these small companies not implementing cybersecurity requirements. So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah. So, Chris, if you rather than having to reinvent the wheel, what if you were to use framework or guardrails from CISA or NIST as an example, so that there is some sort of continuity? Obviously, every business has a different risk profile and there's different sizes and so forth, but there are industry groups that provide at least framework where there's consistency.
And look, at the end of the day, what you need to do is map to some type of common framework, right? That common framework can be a NIST 853, but you more so, and what I think Jacob is saying here is that, look, in a lot of cases, businesses are accepting the risk. I think we're missing the opportunity to figure out what the company wants to do, what the business objectives of the company are, and making sure that we build a unique plan that is based off of, yes, right, different certifying bodies, regulations, and other trust models, but we have to go ahead and translate that back into the business. If we don't do that as chief information security officers, as governance, risk, and compliance professionals, then we're going to find is that we're out of whack with the business, what the business needs, and that the volume is turned down, that we're shut off, that we're outside of those meetings. You want to be in those meetings. You want to have a voice at the table, and you do need it to be based off of different regulations and guidance that are out there. But you also need to make sure that it is sensible for the business. If the business stops in its tracks because you can't use any third-party supplier, any third-party provider, or that every single third-party provider and supplier gets rated at the highest risk level, then you're actually not taking a risk-based view of those vendors you have. It will upset the different business lines at the company. You will be shut out of the meetings, and business will suffer, but also your program will suffer as well. And it all comes down to trust. There's a trusted relationship between your company and the folks that it supplies either products or services to. But then there's a trusted relationship for you and your team as it relates to third-party assurance, third-party reviews, in terms of, can the business lines trust you to understand and properly dimension what the risks are? We can't go ahead and say 95% of all suppliers are high and critical and therefore need and require more due diligence each and every day. That's just unweighted and uneven for business. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but yes, going ahead and benchmarking against others and benchmarking against those broader-based goals is where we need to be.
All right. Appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.